We're about to begin a brand new love journey. Please comment on where you're watching from so we can see that our Soul Stories family is all around the world. The rain had started before dawn and hadn't stopped all morning. It wasn't a storm, just that quiet kind of rain that made the whole city hold its breath. On the 37th floor of Sterling and Company, the fluorescent lights glowed a cold, pale hue. Rows of desks, screens glowing faint blue, and in the corner, Emily Rivers sat still, fingers intertwined as her manager read the final words. "We have to let you go, Emily." Effective immediately. Those words fell like something fragile breaking on marble. For a moment she couldn't speak. She just stared down at the desk, her reflection faint in the glass, pale and struggling to stay composed. I, I don't understand," she whispered. "The campaign failure wasn't my fault." "We've reviewed everything," the woman cut in calmly. "Someone has to take responsibility." Someone. That word echoed in her head, long, hollow, relentless. She wanted to protest, to say she was innocent, that she'd only covered for a coworker, but she knew in places like this, the truth never saved anyone. Timing, power, and silence were what kept people safe. The HR officer placed an envelope on the desk with severance pay. A polite way of saying, "We're done with you." She nodded faintly and stood up before the lump in her throat could win. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and forced politeness. People passed by pretending not to notice. A few glanced her way, then quickly looked away. Those who once smiled at her in the cafeteria now buried their faces in screens, as if failure were contagious. Emily reached her desk. The little plant leaning toward the window, the white mug that said, "You got this," the photo with her mother, the notebook full of ideas no one ever heard. She packed them all into a small cardboard box. When she pushed her chair back, it creaked, a sound like a sigh. No one said goodbye. No one looked up. The elevator descended slowly, each number glowing like a countdown. 31, 22, 10, lobby. The doors slid open, and the world outside felt foreign. Rain-streaked glass towers reflected the blurred shape of San Francisco. She drew a deep breath and stepped out. The wind slapped her face sharply, wet, painfully real. Rain drenched her hair, her blouse, and the box in her arms. She held it tighter, but the bottom began to soften. The papers inside clung together, soggy and ruined. A pen slipped out. Then the frame shattered on the pavement. Emily knelt to pick it up. In the cracked glass, her face smiled, confident, brighter than any office light. Looking at it now, that woman felt like a stranger. Around her, people hurried past, wearing colorful raincoats with music in their earbuds. No one stopped. No one asked. In this city, failure was the one thing people looked away from fastest. She reached the curb. Her shoes were soaked through. The traffic light changed red, glowing across the glistening street. She stood there, clutching the empty box as rain mixed with tears. Then came a voice from memory, her mother's, warm and soft. "When life knocks you down, Emily, don't forget to take a deep breath. Just breathe." So she did, an inhale shaky, an exhale carrying everything she couldn't hold anymore. She walked along the sidewalk, the box tilting, papers fluttering away with the wind. Each step was heavy, but at least she was still able to move. At the end of the street, she set the box down. Everything inside was blurred by rain, the broken mug, the ruined pages, the cracked frame. She stared at it for a long time. 4 years of work, countless late nights, ideas dismissed, praises are never given, all reduced to a pile of wet paper. "Maybe this is how things end," she murmured, quiet and cold. The rain answered by falling harder. She tilted her head up, letting the cold drops slide down her cheeks, her lips, dissolving into salt. The city blurred before her eyes, only her heartbeat and the sound of rain remained. She didn't fight it anymore, didn't pretend to be strong. For the first time in years, she let herself feel sad, fragile, and real. A bus whooshed past, splashing water onto her legs. The sound faded, leaving silence. Emily closed her eyes and took another deep breath. Her heart still ached, but that breath meant she was still alive. When she opened her eyes, she saw her reflection in the glass of the building across the street. A woman with tangled hair, soaked clothes, and empty hands. But in her eyes, a small light. Weak but true. I'm still here. If this were a film, the camera would slowly pull back. The rain would turn to mist, and the city lights would fade to soft streaks of gold. And a voice would whisper, low and steady, "Sometimes the day we lose everything is the day life begins to build us again, piece by piece, breath by breath." Headlights passed, casting her long shadow across the wet street. That image of a woman standing in the rain, empty-handed but unbroken, closed the first chapter. A new beginning, disguised as an ending. The rain still hadn't stopped. The sky over San Francisco wore a silver-gray veil, mirroring the shimmer of headlights on the wet streets. Emily stood on the sidewalk across from her old building, beside the rain-soaked box holding fragments of her former life. She didn't know what she was waiting for. Maybe just for the tears to dry, but the rain was relentless. It wouldn't give her that chance. Then came a sound. The soft purr of an expensive engine cut through the hum of rain. A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its tires turning gently in the water. The door opened. A man stepped out. A charcoal overcoat, rain-speckled leather shoes, and in his hand a black umbrella. He walked toward her, opening it to shield her, his voice deep and steady beneath the rain. "You'll catch a cold if you keep standing here." Startled, she looked up. Rain ran down her cheeks, over her lashes, blurring everything before her. "I'm fine," she murmured. "It's just rain." "No," he said softly, not correcting her, but speaking as though stating a truth. "It's not just rain. It's failure, disguised as rain." She let out a small, shaky laugh. For the first time that day, someone saw her not as a fired employee, but as a human being struggling not to fall apart. The man bent down and picked up her broken picture frame. He wiped the water from it and placed it back into the box. "At least don't let the things you cherish get any wetter," he said quietly. Then he held the umbrella over both of them. "There's a cafe around the corner," he suggested. "We can take shelter there." She hesitated. He was a stranger, well-dressed, calm, his eyes deep and still, like a winter lake. But in that cold, unfeeling rain, his voice was the only warmth she could feel. She nodded faintly. "Just for a bit." The cafe was small, tucked between old brick buildings. Warm air inside, faintly scented with cinnamon and roasted beans. Raindrops tapped against the window, glinting under the soft golden light. They sat by the glass wall. He didn't ask questions. He simply placed a cup of hot cappuccino before her, steam curling upward like smoke from a life that had just fallen apart. She stayed silent for a while, then spoke, her voice hoarse from the chill. "You don't have to do this. I'm just a stranger." "Yes," he replied with a quiet smile. "But sometimes strangers are the only ones who stop." She looked down at her cup. His hand rested near hers, steady, calm. There was no curiosity or pity in his gaze, only presence, as if he were silently telling her, "It's okay, just sit, rest for a while." When the waiter brought the check, Emily hurried to open her wallet. She fumbled through it, only a few wrinkled, damp bills left. Even knowing it wasn't enough, she insisted on paying her share. "You paid for the coffee, but I'll cover mine," she said. "That's not necessary," he replied. "I want to," she said softly with a faint smile, "because I don't want to owe anyone's kindness." She placed the wet bills on the table, water dripping from the edges. The waiter hesitated, ready to return them, but she shook her head gently. "Thank you for bringing the coffee," she said. "You did your job well." The man watched her quietly. A faint smile touched his lips, not of amusement, but of quiet admiration. Even when she has nothing left, she still give on, he thought, a rare kind of kindness in this world. When they stepped out, the rain had softened. The air was clearer now. The wet streets reflected ribbons of amber light from the lampposts. "Thank you for the umbrella," she said, her voice small but sincere. "Thank you for showing me something," he replied. "What's that?" "That kindness still exists even when the world tries to make it disappear." Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a business card, cream-colored, embossed with elegant letters. "Ethan Cole, the Phoenix Foundation. If one day you decide to start over," he said, "call me." She took it, unsure what to say. Only managed a quiet nod. "I'm not sure I have the courage to start again," she admitted. "That's all right," he smiled. "Courage doesn't mean not being afraid. It means standing up while your heart is still trembling. He tilted his head in farewell, then walked away with the black umbrella, fading into the thin mist of rain. His car rolled forward, red taillights dissolving into the wet distance. Emily stood there, watching him go. The business card in her hand was damp, the ink slightly smudged, yet his name remained clear. She didn't know why, but just seeing it made her chest feel lighter. She tightened her grip on it, then looked up at the gray sky. The rain had finally stopped. Tiny droplets still clung to her hair and shoulders, glinting with city light. A slow breath left her lips, steadier and warmer than before. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely invisible. Somewhere in this noisy city, a stranger had stopped, and that even for just a moment was enough to spark a small, fragile, but profoundly real light inside her. 3 days had passed since that rainy afternoon. The sun had finally come out, but in Ethan Cole's mind, the image of the woman standing in the rain had not faded. It wasn't her appearance that lingered, it was her eyes. The quiet determination behind them as she insisted on paying for her coffee with damp bills no one expected her to use. A simple act of dignity, yet it stayed with him. A man like him, the CEO of Cole Industries and founder of the Phoenix Foundation, had met countless people. Successful, charming, brilliant. But strangely, it was a stranger in the rain who had made him stop and think. That morning during a meeting, Ethan suddenly fell silent mid-sentence. His gaze drifted to the window, where raindrops from days before still clung faintly to the glass, glimmering in the sunlight. "Miles," he called. "Yes, sir?" "3 days ago, I met a woman named Emily Rivers. She used to work in marketing. Can you find out more about her?" The assistant looked slightly surprised but asked no questions. Ethan Cole wasn't the kind of man who took an interest in anyone without a reason. The next afternoon, a file appeared on his desk. Printed on the cover, Emily Grace Rivers, 29 years old. Neat, concise, and inside it, a forgotten proposal buried in old Sterling and Company archives. Small hands, big dreams. A project for teaching creativity and life skills to homeless children in the Bay Area. He flipped through the pages. The writing wasn't polished or fancy, no elaborate charts, just honest words. If we can give children faith in their own abilities, they will no longer fear the dark. Ethan sat still for a long time. He saw something that most people in philanthropy lacked, a heart that truly believed the world could be better. "Phoenix Foundation has money and vision," he murmured, half to himself. "What we're missing is this." At 3 o'clock, he called Miles in. "Set up a meeting. Invite Miss Rivers to my office, not to discuss her old job, but a new beginning." Miles hesitated. "Sir, do you think she'll agree?" According to the file, she was recently laid off. "She might." "Just tell her this isn't an interview," Ethan said calmly. "It's simply a conversation between two people who once stood under the same rain." 2 days later, the morning air in San Francisco was unusually clear. Emily stood before the glass tower that read, "The Phoenix Foundation." She could hardly believe she was there. When she'd received the call from a man introducing himself as Mr. Cole's assistant, she had assumed it was a mistake. But his tone was calm and confident, so she hadn't dared hang up. Inside, she was struck not by luxury but by warmth. It didn't feel like a corporation. Natural light filled the space, with pale wood and soft tones, accompanied by photographs of children on the walls. This place felt built on belief. A secretary led her to the top floor. The glass doors slid open, and Ethan stood there, facing the window where the sunlight poured in. "You came," he said without turning. "I wasn't sure if the invitation was real." "It is," he replied, a faint smile touching his lips. "Unless you're still afraid of coffee with strangers." She let out a small, trembling laugh, but it was real. "You remember that? Hard to forget. Not everyone tips a barista with wet dollar bills." He motioned for her to sit. On the desk lay the folder she instantly recognized. "Small hands, big dreams." She touched it gently, her eyes widening. "Where did you get this?" "From Sterling and Company's old files," he said. "The company you worked for. They might have overlooked it, but I didn't." "It's just an old idea," she said softly. It was never approved. No, Emily, he said slowly, his voice steady and warm. It's exactly what Phoenix needs. He sat down across from her, fingers interlaced. I want you to join me. Help me relaunch the foundation, less about charts and numbers, more about people and heart. Emily froze. She had never imagined being trusted again, not after losing all faith in herself. Why me? She asked quietly. Because you still believe good things are worth fighting for, he said calmly, but unwavering. She looked down, her hands trembling slightly. You don't understand, she whispered. I'm not who you think I am. I was fired for a mistake I didn't make, and I couldn't even defend myself. I'm not strong. I'm not talented. Ethan paused for a moment. Maybe that's exactly why you're the right one, he said. I don't need someone perfect. I need someone real, someone who still believes, even after losing. Silence filled the room. The clock ticked softly in the background. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I need time to think. Of course, he said, smiling gently. This door will always be open. When you're ready, just walk in. She stood up. He escorted her to the door, polite but not distant. Before leaving, she turned back, hesitant. Do you really think I can help? I don't think, he said quietly. I know. The door closed behind her. Outside, a soft breeze stirred. The sky still held traces of morning mist. Emily walked down the street holding his business card. The words "The Phoenix Foundation" no longer felt like just a name, but a promise, faint and uncertain, that maybe something new awaited her. She lifted her head toward the brightening sky, and an unfamiliar feeling rose within her. Not quite hope, but certainly no longer despair. A week had passed since the meeting at the Phoenix Foundation, and Emily still hadn't called back. She'd read and reread the business cards so many times that its corners had begun to fray. Every time she thought of dialing the number, she stopped. A familiar voice in her head whispered, Don't dream, Emily. Beautiful things are never meant for you. And yet, that Monday morning, the phone rang. A soft, professional voice came through. Good morning, Miss Rivers. We're hosting a trial interview session for the Phoenix Foundation. Would you be available to join? You don't need to prepare anything. Just be yourself. She froze, no mention of Ethan. No explanation of who had invited her. Part of her hesitated, but another part, the one that had flickered to life during their last meeting, said, Go. That day, the Phoenix building gleamed under the sun, but Emily's heart still raced, like someone stepping into a dream she was afraid to wake from. A group of 4 people waited in the 12th floor conference room, 2 department directors, a communications head, and a quiet man at the end of the table who hadn't introduced himself. She didn't know that Ethan Cole was sitting there, not as the CEO, but as an observer. In front of each candidate was a folder labeled Media Campaign Proposal, Second Chance Project, Supporting Homeless Youth. The goal is to create a campaign that fosters trust and hope. The first candidate stood up. He presented a sleek slideshow filled with charts and visuals. We need powerful imagery, he declared. Tears, sympathy, emotional storytelling. People connect through tragedy. The panel nodded, taking notes. The second candidate talked about digital platforms, viral reach, and hashtags. Then it was Emily's turn. She sat still for a moment, her hands trembling slightly. No slides, no graphs, just a few handwritten pages, her handwriting, shaky but honest. She took a deep breath. I think we've grown too used to seeing sadness, she began. Crying children, dirty faces, desperate eyes. She looked up. Her gaze was clearer now. But that only makes people pity them, not believe in them. What these kids need isn't pity, it's faith. The room fell silent. Ethan lifted his head slightly. We don't need to project their pain, she continued softly but firmly. We need to illuminate their strength. Not poor kids, but look what they can do. She raised a sheet of paper. On it, written by hand. They don't need saving. They just need a chance. One of the directors frowned. Isn't that too mild? People donate because they're moved to tears, not because they admire. Emily smiled faintly. If we make them admire, Their giving won't stop at money. It'll become belief, and belief lasts longer than any campaign. Silence thickened in the room. No one spoke. Only the soft tap of a pen on the table from the man sitting at the far end. Ethan Cole sat quietly, watching her every gesture. He remembered that rainy day, the woman holding a few wet bills, yet still smiling and thanking the barista. And now that same light, quiet, steady, unpretentious, but real. One of the directors began to wrap up the session. Ethan set down his pen and stood. The faint scrape of the chair made everyone turn. Emily looked up and froze. "Mr. Cole," she whispered. "Apologies for the surprise," he said, his voice deep, warm. "I just wanted to make sure you got a chance to speak, not for me, but for yourself." No one said a word. Emily stood still, hands tightening at her sides. "So this was your plan all along," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No, this wasn't a plan." He took a slow step closer, his tone softening. "This was destiny trying to give you another chance." The words hung in the air, changing something unseen. It no longer felt like an interview, but a moment where two people realized they were standing at the intersection of something greater. When the evaluations ended, the other candidates left one by one. Emily remained by the window. Outside, sunlight filtered through the clouds, scattering gold across the wooden floor. Ethan approached. "How do you feel?" "Honestly," she said, "I didn't think I'd be chosen. I just wanted to say what I truly felt." "That's exactly why you were chosen." She turned, eyes wide. "You mean—" "I need people who believe what they say," he replied. "You don't have to convince anyone. Just keep seeing the world the way you do." Then with a faint smile, "The rest leave it to me." When Emily left the building that afternoon, her heart felt both lighter and frightened. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time she didn't feel invisible. She had been heard not because she needed pity, but because she had spoken from her heart. Down below, sunlight reflected off the glass engraved with the words Phoenix Foundation, the rebirth of hope. She smiled softly, whispering, "Maybe. I'm learning how to rise again." High above, Ethan watched her from the window, following her as she disappeared into the crowd. He didn't know where the future would lead them. He only knew that this interview had helped him find more than just an employee. It had helped him rediscover faith. From her very first day at the Phoenix Foundation, Emily knew she had stepped into a different world. Not because of the gleaming building or the modern offices, but because of the warmth that filled the air. No one looked at her as the new hire. No one mentioned her past. There were only genuine smiles, quiet laughter during breaks, and photos of children lining the hallways, each captioned in handwritten letters. "We dream, we build, we rise." Emily was assigned to the community outreach team in a modest position with a modest salary, but to her it felt like a miracle. Every morning she arrived earlier than anyone else, brewed coffee, arranged the documents, and watched the sunlight spill through the glass, casting golden streaks across the desks. She had never truly felt like she belonged anywhere until now. Ethan Cole didn't interfere much with her work. He was calm, composed, his eyes serious, but never cold. Sometimes when passing by, he would simply nod and say, "Good, keep it up." To most people, those were ordinary words, but to Emily, they meant trust. Something she had lost for years now returned to her, gently. At first, she kept her distance. She was afraid of repeating old mistakes, of being blamed again, of watching everything crumble as before. Ethan noticed but said nothing. He simply created space for her to breathe. When Emily's mother was hospitalized, she requested a few days off. The next morning, when she returned, she discovered her meeting schedule had been quietly moved to the afternoon, allowing her to spend mornings at the hospital. She stared at her calendar, puzzled. "Who changed this?" she asked softly. A coworker smiled. "My guess? Mr. Cole." Ethan never mentioned it, not once. He simply passed her desk later that day and asked quietly, "How's your mother?" "Better now, thank you." "Good. That's all that matters." A few days later, she noticed her desk had been moved closer to the window. The morning light poured directly onto it, warm and soft. She didn't ask, but everyone knew who had ordered the change. "He said the lighting there was poor," a colleague whispered. "But I think Maybe he noticed you always looked outside? Emily smiled faintly, saying nothing. She wasn't accustomed to being noticed, especially by someone like him, a man the world seemed to stop and listen to. By her second month at Phoenix, the workload had grown heavier. Emily and a group of children from a temporary housing shelter were preparing for a photo exhibition titled Dreams in Motion. The kids photographed their own lives, torn shoes, paint-stained hands, the toothless grin of a child who had just sold their first drawing. Emily guided them to write captions. This isn't sadness. This is the beginning. Ethan attended the final rehearsal, standing quietly in the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched. And in his eyes, there wasn't just approval, there was belief. Late that evening, the office was empty. Only Emily remained. The desk lamp cast a warm glow over her tired but peaceful face. She was rearranging posters, chalk-colored letters spelling, "Hope is a place." The clock struck 11. Her head sank onto her arms. Her eyes were blurred from exhaustion. Moments later, she drifted into sleep, surrounded by the scent of new paper and cold coffee. The door opened quietly. Ethan's footsteps were almost soundless. He carried a folder, intending to leave it on her desk. But when he saw her asleep, he stopped. She looked so peaceful that he couldn't bring himself to wake her. The lamplight traced the loose strands of her hair, the scattered notes around her. Ideas. Hope. Children deserve more. He set the folder down softly, then removed his jacket. Gently, he draped it over her shoulders, careful, as if even the air might disturb the moment. He stood there for a few seconds, watching her. Then he whispered, barely loud enough for the silence to hear, "You don't have to prove anything, Emily. Just be yourself." She stirred slightly, her breathing steady, shoulders trembling lightly beneath the warm fabric. For reasons she couldn't explain, her sleep that night was deep and peaceful. For the first time in months, she had a dream. Not of nightmares, but of sunlight, children laughing, and someone calling her name in a low, gentle voice. The next morning, she woke to an empty office, sunlight streaming through the blinds. The jacket was neatly folded on the chair beside her, with a small handwritten note. "Don't work until you forget yourself. Phoenix needs you healthy. EC," she smiled. For the first time in her life, she felt cared for, not out of pity, but out of genuine regard. She felt truly seen. She slipped the jacket over her shoulders and took a deep breath. The faint, masculine, clean, familiar scent lingered in the air, carrying something unspoken, something she couldn't yet name. Rumors begin the way they always do, small, uncertain, but fast. A glance, a half-hidden message, a laugh echoes down the hallway. That's all it takes to set an entire office on fire. I heard she got hired because she's close to the CEO. Everyone sees how Mr. Cole treats her differently. Don't be naive. No one gets special treatment without a reason. At first, those whispers were nothing but passing wind. Then slowly they became a quiet storm. Emily first overheard it in the break room. Two co-workers were talking, unaware that she stood behind the door. "Maybe she just knows how to make a lasting impression," one said with a smirk. "Good for her," the other replied, half joking, half true. "Pretty and polite. That's all it takes." She stood still, not angry. Just tired. Like an old wound reopening. Not because it hurt anew, but because the pain was so familiar. That evening, she stayed late at the office. A resignation letter lay folded neatly on her desk. The blue glow of the monitor washed over her pale face. She had promised herself she would never let the past repeat. But maybe she wasn't strong enough to fight against suspicious eyes again. When Ethan knocked and entered, she startled. He saw the letter immediately, his brow tightening. "What's this?" "My resignation." "Why?" "You know why," she said hoarsely. "I don't want to damage your reputation or the foundation's. People think I'm being favored." Ethan fell silent, his gaze deep, heavy. "You're leaving because of a few lies." "Not just lies. I've lived through this before at Sterling and Company. I can't do it again." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You think I care what they say?" "No, but they do. And you're going to let them define you again?" Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "I don't want to fight anymore, Ethan. I'm tired. He said nothing for a moment. Then he looked at her for a long time, gently set the letter back on the desk, and folded it once more. If you want to leave, I won't stop you, he said quietly. But at least don't let this rain end in silence. Outside, the rain began to fall, thick, heavy, just like the day they met. Emily walked out of the building, clutching a small bag, head bowed. Footsteps followed behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. Ethan, don't. No, Emily. Listen to me. He caught up and opened his umbrella over her. Let them say what they want, he said softly. They only talk about what they can't understand. She shook her head, her voice breaking. It's not about them, Ethan. It's me. I can't bear another misunderstanding. I'm not strong enough. He looked at her not as the composed CEO, but as a man trying to hold on to something fragile. Then stop being strong alone, he whispered. Don't fight alone, Emily. No one can. She stood still, rain sliding over her shoulders, mixing with her breath. He tilted the umbrella toward her, letting his own shoulder soak instead. She looked at him, the man who once stepped into the rain to shelter her, and realized that history might be repeating itself, but the feeling wasn't the same anymore. A long silence, only the sound of rain hitting the pavement and the wind through the trees. You don't understand, she said softly. Everything fell apart because of one lie. I lost it all, my job, my dignity, my trust, even myself. Ethan's reply came slow, steady, and warm. I understand more than you think, but you're forgetting something. They didn't take everything from you. You gave them the power to. She looked up at him, stunned. You want me to take back the right to believe in yourself. The rain still fell, but it was now softer. They stood beneath the umbrella, saying nothing more. No promises, no explanations. Just two people, and between them, a fragile trust, flickering back to life like a small flame shielded from the wind. A car passed by, splashing water onto their shoes. Ethan let out a quiet laugh. I told you last time you'll catch a cold standing in the rain. Her lips curved into a faint smile. You did, but this time I'm not crying. He nodded, tilting the umbrella further over her. Good. I'm tired of sad rainstorms. They walked side by side down the sidewalk, slowly, through the fading drizzle. No tension, no tears. Only the warmth beneath a small shared umbrella and a silence that understood more than words ever could. The streetlights shimmered against the wet pavement. Two figures, one umbrella, one trust rebuilt. Neither spoke again. But with each step, something between them had quietly mended, not through words but through presence. The San Francisco night was quiet, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the glass. Inside the Phoenix Foundation, the light from Ethan's office still glowed. He sat alone, shirt sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on the screen, though he wasn't really reading anything. In his hand, he turned a small silver ring, old, scratched, worn smooth from years of habit. He had worked late for as long as he could remember, not out of passion, but because silence was the only thing that stopped the memories. Emily returned to the office that night. She had forgotten a file. She didn't expect anyone to still be there. But as she walked down the hallway, light spilled from beneath his door. She was about to knock, then froze when she heard his voice. It was lower than usual, tired, different. I can't get close to anyone anymore, Mom, he said quietly. Every time I try, I end up hurting them. A pause. The woman on the other end spoke softly, worriedly. Ethan, that was years ago. It wasn't your fault. But I was the one driving that night, he interrupted. If I hadn't asked her to come to the office to review that contract, she wouldn't have been there. She wouldn't have died. Emily froze. In that instant, she understood that the calm, unshakable man everyone saw carried a wound that had never healed. When the call ended, she gently knocked on the door. Ethan looked up, startled, the exhaustion in his eyes impossible to hide. You're still here? I forgot a file. I didn't mean to overhear, It's fine, he said softly, cutting her off. Maybe I should have told someone sooner. He walked to the window. Outside, the rain shimmered under the city lights. She was my fiancée, he said slowly. We built my first company together before Phoenix. One night, an electrical leak occurred at the test site. I asked her to come sign the insurance revision. She went and never came back. He paused, taking a deep breath, the ring still turning between his fingers. Since then, I swore I'd never let anyone close again. I thought, if I kept my distance, no one would get hurt. Emily said nothing. She simply looked at him with the quiet kind of understanding he'd never been offered before. You built those walls, Ethan, she said softly, not to protect others, but to protect yourself from feeling, from remembering what it's like to lose. He turned toward her, surprised as if she'd just named something he'd spent years hiding. For a long moment, the mask he wore, that composed, unbreakable exterior, began to crack. You talk like you understand, he said, half smiling, weary. I do, she replied quietly, because I used to be afraid too. Ethan's eyes searched hers. Afraid of what? Of trusting, she said, of letting someone close enough to break me again. But if I keep living that way, I'll never really live at all. She stepped closer to the window, standing beside him. Together they watched the thin lines of rain slide down the glass. I think, she whispered, sometimes we don't need to move on from the past. We just need to learn to live with it without letting it define us. Ethan stayed silent. Then with a low, honest voice, he said, maybe. I'm not the only one here learning how to believe again. For a while there was only the sound of rain tapping against the window pane. Emily turned slightly toward him. The dim light softened his face, no longer that of the untouchable CEO, but a man quietly trying to free himself from his own armor. She smiled gently. You know, I used to think you were the kind of man too perfect to ever be hurt. And now, he asked, now I see. You're just someone trying to heal. Like me. He looked at her, gratitude flickering in his eyes, something rare for him. He didn't speak, but the faint nod he gave was enough to say, thank you for seeing me. They stayed in the office for a while longer, saying nothing more. Emily helped him gather the loose papers, stacking the scattered documents. The silence between them felt different now, no longer the distance between a boss and an employee, but the quiet understanding of two souls once broken, now learning how to meet halfway. At the door, she stopped and turned. Ethan, she said softly, you didn't destroy anyone. You just forgot that even kindness deserves to be shared. He let out a small, wistful laugh. You might be the first person to ever say that to me. Then keep it, she smiled. Consider it a keepsake. She left, closing the door gently behind her. Ethan stood still, watching her silhouette fade into the hallway light, small yet steady. He raised his hand, touched the ring one last time, then slipped it off and set it on the desk. The rain outside continued to fall, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel cold. Winter had made New York more dazzling than ever. Traffic shimmered beneath the streetlights, and the skyscrapers glowed as if lit from within. Tonight, the Phoenix Foundation was hosting its annual charity gala, a grand evening where entrepreneurs, artists, and philanthropists gathered to share one dream, to give opportunities to those who never had one. Backstage at the Sterling Grand Hotel, Emily's hands trembled slightly. The pale blue dress her colleagues had chosen for her struck a perfect balance between elegance and simplicity, understated yet radiant. Light caught on the silver bracelet around her wrist, a small gift from Phoenix to its staff, but to her it felt like a symbol of rebirth. She had never imagined she would ever belong in a place like this. Surrounded by violin melodies and polite laughter from people of influence, she couldn't help but feel a little out of place, until she heard his voice. You're here, Ethan said as he approached from behind, his voice low, warm. She turned. The black tuxedo fit him perfectly, transforming him not from the quiet man of the office, but into the one who commanded an entire room with effortless presence. The light reflected off his hair, and for a fleeting moment, she realized. The way he looked at her was unlike the way he looked at anyone else. You look different, she said softly. And you, he smiled, look exactly like the person I wanted to thank tonight. The gala began. Jazz music drifted through the golden glow, glasses clinked, and laughter mingled with the hum of conversation. Ethan stepped onto the stage, holding a microphone in hand. His voice filled the hall steady, deep but rich with sincerity. We often believe that organizations like Phoenix are built on finance, strategy, or vision. But the truth is they are built on people who choose to believe in good, even when the world gives them every reason not to. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd until it found Emily's. Someone reminded me of that, he continued. She made me realize that we don't save people. We simply give them the chance to save themselves. The hall fell silent for a moment, then soft, heartfelt applause filled the air. Emily lowered her head, hiding her smile, but her heart raced not just from his words, but from the way he looked at her when he spoke them. After the speech, the ballroom transformed into a dance floor. The music slowed gentle as a heartbeat. Ethan walked toward her, extending his hand, a playful tilt in his tone. If I said I'm terrible at dancing, would you believe me? No, she teased. You seem like the kind of man who plans everything. Wrong, he said, fingers brushing hers. Tonight I just want to let my heart lead. She hesitated for a breath, then placed her hand in his. The music wrapped around them, the deep hum of the contrabass, the soft whisper of the trumpet. Ethan's hand rested lightly on her back, as though afraid to disturb her calm. They moved slowly across the marble floor, bathed in gold, forgetting the crowd entirely. You know, he murmured, eyes still on hers, it's been a long time since this place felt meaningful. Why? Because you reminded me why I started all of this. Not to impress, to heal. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the golden light like still water. I used to think I didn't belong in a world like this, she whispered, but you made me believe. Maybe I deserve to stand here too. You don't just deserve it, he said softly. You make this place better. The music swelled. She leaned in, her cheek brushing his shoulder, just a breath, yet the moment stretched like eternity. Neither spoke. They simply listened to the music, to the sound of their hearts finding rhythm beneath the glow. Ethan didn't kiss her. He only bent slightly, his voice so low it was almost part of the melody. Don't ever let the world make you smaller than your heart, Emily. The words, gentle as air, yet deep as a vow, lingered between them. She closed her eyes, letting his voice sink in, like light touching water. When the song ended, they didn't let go right away. A few guests smiled knowingly, but neither of them noticed. In that moment, among power and prestige, they were simply two souls who had found each other in a crowded world. The lights dimmed. Ethan guided her toward the balcony. The crisp New York air swept in, carrying the scent of wine and lavender from the ballroom below. Thank you, she said softly. Not for tonight, but for believing in me, even when I couldn't. He looked at her, his smile slow, sincere, unguarded. I didn't believe in you, Emily, he said gently. I just saw what the world forgot to see. They stood there under a sky of city lights. No touch, no words, just a look that said everything. This wasn't gratitude. It was something deeper, lighter, truer. And in the golden reflection of the chandeliers above, Emily Rivers realized she was no longer the woman who once stood in the rain, fired and forgotten. She was someone seen, heard, and quietly, undeniably loved. Monday morning began with a dull gray light, the kind of light that quietly warns something terrible is coming, though people rarely realize it until it's too late. When Emily stepped into the Phoenix Foundation office, she knew instantly that something was wrong. The air, once warm and alive, felt heavy now. Conversations stopped the moment she passed. A few eyes looked away, a few heads bent low, and the short distance between her and the others suddenly stretched into something endless. On the massive screen hanging in the lobby, the headline glared like a knife. Phoenix Foundation employee under investigation for embezzlement sources. Confirmed previous scandal at Sterling and Company. Her photo taken during the homeless children's exhibition had been crudely edited beside a chaotic financial chart. At the bottom, the ticker flashed over and over. Police investigating. Phoenix accounts temporarily frozen. Emily froze. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear every beat echo in her chest. She reread each word, hoping this was a nightmare or a cruel joke. or a mistake from a world that thrived on scandal more than truth. But it wasn't. It was all real. And what hurt most was the look in Ethan's eyes from across the room. Not anger, not disappointment, just the strained gaze of a man trying to stay composed while everything he believed in fell apart. Soul Stories fam, if you're watching on another channel, come home to us at Soul Stories, where tens of thousands of listeners and sharers come together. When his office door closed, it sounded like a verdict. Emily stood before him, still clutching the newspaper. Outside, the rain began softly at first, tapping against the glass like the sound of a breaking heart. "Ethan," she began, her voice trembling, "you have to believe me. I didn't do this. Someone's framing me." He cut her off, his tone rough, as if he'd had to swallow 100 decisions before speaking. "Do you realize this almost destroyed the foundation? Donors are pulling out. The press is circling the building. Everything we built is collapsing." "I know," she whispered, tears falling before she even noticed. "But I swear, Ethan, I didn't do it. I couldn't." He turned away, facing the sheets of rain outside. His broad shoulders trembled. She couldn't tell if from anger, pain, or fear. "You always said trust was the foundation of Phoenix," she said, voice breaking. "And I thought you meant that." "Trust doesn't mean blindness," he snapped, turning back to her, his eyes suddenly sharp and cold. "I've believed in people before and been betrayed every time. Maybe this time. I believed too soon." The words shattered between them like glass. She stared at him, silent. Every defense she'd prepared dissolved into nothing. "So you do think I did it?" she said quietly. Ethan didn't answer. His silence, slow and merciless, was the answer. She nodded faintly, lips trembling. "You said you built Phoenix to heal, Ethan. But maybe you still haven't learned that other people can be hurt too." She set her employee badge on his desk, beside the wristwatch he'd worn at the gala. Her voice was small but steady. "You can lose faith in me if you must, but I won't lose myself just to prove who I am." She walked out as the rain grew heavier. The drops hit her face cold, stinging, relentless. The same navy vest he had once draped over her shoulders, a small gift of trust, was now soaked through, heavy with water. Around her, people hurried for shelter. Emily didn't. She kept walking slowly through rising puddles. She wasn't afraid of getting wet. She was afraid she'd return to the same place she started, standing in the rain, empty-handed, heart in ruins. She remembered that morning when he had stepped forward, opened an umbrella and said, "You'll catch a cold if you keep standing like this." Back then, he was faithful. He was the miracle that made her begin again. Now he was the rain, cold, unintentional, but cutting deep all the same. From the top floor, Ethan stood by the window, watching through the haze of water and fog. The city stretched out before him, wrapped in a downpour that seemed endless. He saw her small figure vanish into the blur of the intersection, her dark jacket growing darker with each step. The anger inside him slowly melted, leaving behind only a vast, aching emptiness. He no longer knew what was true or who to believe. He only knew that a part of him, the most vital part, was walking away from that building and might never come back. Miles knocked softly on the door. "You know she didn't do it, don't you?" he said quietly. Ethan closed his eyes. No reply. Only the sound of rain, steady, relentless. Like an answer he couldn't bring himself to speak. That night, Emily sat in a small cafe near the harbor. The weak light reflected off the wet table. Her phone buzzed endlessly with missed calls and messages from colleagues, as well as half-sincere words from people who no longer knew how to talk to her. She turned it off. Then she pulled from her coat pocket an old worn business card. The Phoenix Foundation. The paper was creased, the ink faded, but Ethan Cole was still perfectly legible. She brushed her thumb over the letters, a habit more than anything, then set it down on the table. Outside, the rain kept falling. From the cafe's old speaker came the slow hum of a jazz tune. A smoky female voice sang, "Some hearts break quietly," beneath the sound of rain. Emily looked out through the glass. Raindrops clung to the window, then slipped down slowly as if they were crying the last tears she had left to give. And this time, no one came with an umbrella. In the empty Phoenix office, Ethan sat alone, pinching the bridge of his nose. On the desk before him was a cold cup of chamomile tea, her favorite. The faint scent lingered. He wasn't angry anymore, nor suspicious, only hollowed a kind of pain that didn't burn, but hollowed you out from the inside. And in that silence, he finally understood. He hadn't lost an employee. He had lost the only person who had ever taught him that trust wasn't a risk, it was the way back to yourself. 3 weeks had passed since Emily's departure. San Francisco had sunk into an endless stretch of rain, silvery ribbons falling across the skyline, softening even the proudest towers. The Phoenix Foundation still ran. The lights still glowed. Projects still moved forward. But something essential was missing. The laughter of the woman who always kept a cup of chamomile tea by the window. Ethan worked late every night, not out of duty, but because silence had become his punishment. Every time his eyes drifted toward her empty desk, he heard her last words echo inside his chest. You still haven't learned that other people can hurt too. That morning, Miles brought in a small brown envelope. Delivered from the South Bay Children's Shelter, he said. Someone wanted to thank Phoenix Foundation. Ethan nodded absently, barely glancing up. But when he tore it open, the handwriting stopped him. Round, uneven letters are a child's. Thank you, Miss Emily. Because of you, I have books and a bed to sleep in. I still keep the drawing you helped me finish. I hope one day you'll come back. Below it, a crayon drawing, a woman holding an umbrella over a little boy in the rain. At the very bottom, written faintly in pencil, she said the world is still kind if we keep believing. Ethan stared at it for a long time. His vision blurred. Whether from the light or something else, he couldn't tell. All this time, he thought he was protecting the foundation, protecting its ideals, but in that moment it mattered most that he had betrayed those very ideals in her. That afternoon, he left the office early for the first time in weeks. The city was drenched in rain, and the faint scent of coffee and smoke lingered. He drove toward the outskirts where Emily once said she volunteered. A small yellow house stood between 2 rows of maples. A young teacher recognized him instantly. You're Mr. Cole, right? Miss Emily talked about you. Her name, Miss Emily, landed in his heart like a single, soft note that broke the silence. She used to come here? He asked quietly. Yes, the woman nodded. She helped rebuild our reading room, bought books with the bonus she got from Phoenix. She said, if they don't believe in me, at least these kids will still have something to believe in. Ethan didn't move. Each word felt like a needle pricking through the armor of his composure. She had never cared about image or reputation. She only cared about those children, about giving something back to a world that had taken so much from her. That night, Ethan returned to the office. He reopened the archived financial records and began to review them line by line. The rain outside blurred the city lights into streaks of gold. Hours passed before he found it a single transfer, altered. The name Fiona L., a former accountant from Sterling and Company, embedded in a falsified record. His fist clenched. The desk rattled. He called Miles in, his voice steady, decisive. We're reopening the investigation. She was framed. You're sure? More sure than I've ever been of anything in my life. For the first time in months, Ethan felt something ignite again. Not anger, faith, raw, fragile, but real. 3 days later, Phoenix Foundation released an official statement. All accusations against Emily Rivers were withdrawn. The evidence had been falsified. Fiona, the source of the leak, was under investigation for fraud and defamation. The donors returned. The press published their apologies. At the conference, Ethan stood beneath the flashes of cameras, calm, yet his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen himself clearly for the first time. He didn't read from the prepared speech. Instead, he held up the child's letter. There are moments, he said, voice rough, when we forget what truly builds an organization. Not strategy, not money, not power, but trust. And I did the worst thing a leader can do. I doubted the only person who truly believed in me. He raised the letter slightly. This reminded me why we exist. Not to prove who's right, but to keep the world kind, even when it forgets how. Silence filled the room, heavy and bright all at once. When the press conference ended, he stood alone by the window. The city shimmered beneath a gentle drizzle. The neon sign of Phoenix Foundation glowed through the mist, flickering like candlelight refusing to die. He gripped the letter tightly, eyes searching the horizon. For a second, he thought he saw her, a woman with a white umbrella, smiling faintly before fading into the crowd. And something inside him softened. The part of him that had long believed he was beyond redemption. He could finally feel it again. Faith in others and in himself. That night, Ethan returned to his apartment. He opened the window, letting the cold air sweep through. On the table sat a long cold. He poured fresh, hot water and watched the steam rise. Soft piano music played from the radio. Yeruma, river flows in you. The lights outside blurred into gold through the glass. He whispered quietly to no one and to her, "Emily, if you can still hear this, know that I believe you now. And this time I won't let any storm come between us again." San Francisco was raining again. Not the harsh, heavy rain that once tore the sky apart, but a soft drizzle, the kind that felt more like memory than weather. The city was veiled in silver mist, sloping streets glimmered under amber lights, and raindrops slid lazily down the windshield, as if even time itself had decided to slow down and breathe. Ethan parked in front of Green Willow Cafe, the same place where he had met her for the first time. Back then, she had stood by the window, arms wrapped around a small cardboard box, eyes red from being fired. And he, just a stranger, had offered her an umbrella and said softly, "You'll catch a cold if you keep standing here." Now the scene had come full circle. Only this time, he was the one trembling in the rain. He pushed the door open. The small bell chimed, scattering the scent of roasted coffee and slow jazz into the air. She was there, sitting in the same corner, a cup of coffee beside an old Phoenix report, open to a page she'd once written herself. "Trust is not a risk, it's a form of hope." When she looked up, their eyes met. Not as strangers, not quite as lovers either, but as two souls who had circled through pain only to return to where it all began. He stood for a moment, then walked toward her. She didn't speak. Between them, the rain whispered softly on the roof, steady and warm, like the sound of two hearts learning not to be afraid anymore. "I read the letter from the boy at the shelter," Ethan began quietly. "And after that, I found the truth." She stayed silent, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. "You were framed," he continued. "I know that now. Fiona forged the records. And I." He stopped, exhaled slowly. "I didn't believe you. And that is the worst thing I've ever done." She looked at him. There was no anger in her eyes, only a sadness smoothed by time. "You don't owe me an apology," she said softly. "The world isn't always fair. I'm used to that." "No," he said firmly. "You shouldn't be." He placed a small envelope on the table, the child's thank you letter. "You taught those kids to believe in kindness," he said. "Now it's my turn to learn that from you." She unfolded the paper, traced the uneven lines of handwriting, and smiled faintly. "His letters are a mess." "Maybe," Ethan replied, "but every word is written from the heart, just like yours." They sat in silence for a while. The coffee grew cold. Outside, the rain shimmered under passing headlights, painting streaks of gold on the wet pavement. The cafe was warm, scented with cinnamon and almonds. Then Ethan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The first time I met you, I offered you a job." She nodded gently. "I remember." He lifted his gaze. The golden light flickered across his eyes. "This time, I want to offer you something harder." "What's that?" "A reason to stay. Stay with Phoenix. And with me." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that trembles, half pain, half disbelief. "You should really stop showing up in the rain, Mr. Cole." "Then you," he said, smiling, "should stop letting me stand in it alone." The words hung between them, delicate, impossible to ignore. A single tear slipped down her cheek and fell onto the table. Not from sorrow, but from the quiet recognition that what they'd lost was finding its way back, slowly, honestly. He reached out and touched her hand. For the first time, she didn't pull away. His palm was warm, steady, a silent promise that maybe, this time, she didn't have to be strong by herself. They stayed like that, saying nothing. Outside, the drizzle turned into a silver curtain of light. Each droplet shimmered against the glass like a heartbeat. Emily looked out the same window where she had once stood alone in the rain. Same view, same sound, But this time she wasn't alone. Ethan leaned slightly closer, his voice low, sincere. I can't change the past, but I can be here for the present, and for whatever comes next. You don't have to forgive me now. Just don't go again. She turned back to him. Her eyes glistened, but her lips curved into that gentle smile. He had never forgotten. You know, she said softly, every time it rains, I think of your white umbrella. However, I no longer think I need it. I've learned how to stand in the rain and not be afraid. Ethan smiled back. That's good. But if you'll let me, I'd still like to stand with you, even if it means sharing just half the sky. They stayed there a long time by the fogged window. No vows, no declarations. Only the soft hum of Clair de Lune drifting from an old speaker. Outside, the rain kept falling. But inside that tiny cafe, where everything had once begun, two people who had lost their faith sat side by side watching the rain trace new beginnings on the glass. A year had passed since that final rainy night. Spring had returned to San Francisco, clear, radiant, alive. Morning sunlight rolled down the glass towers and spilled over the sloping streets, as if the city itself had awakened from a long sleep after the storm. The Phoenix Foundation, too, had undergone a transformation. From a small organization once shaken by scandal, it had become a symbol of trust and compassion. The white walls of its office were now lined with photographs of smiling children, families once lost to despair, faces that told stories far greater than charts or numbers ever could. That evening, at a glass hall overlooking the bay, Phoenix received the Innovation with Humanity Award. Light shimmered across the water and danced along the ceiling like 1,000 gentle stars reborn. Ethan Cole, once known as the Icebound CEO, stepped onto the stage with a genuine smile this time. No longer the guarded, solemn man he once was, but someone who had finally learned to forgive himself. His voice resonated through the hall, deep, calm, sincere. A year ago, I thought the strength of an organization came from vision, from its ability to survive. But I was wrong. Phoenix was never built on power or prestige. It was built on compassion, and she reminded me that compassion only begins when courage does. Applause filled the room, but Ethan's eyes didn't turn to the crowd. They found her. Emily sat in the front row wearing a simple pearl-colored dress, her hair tied loosely, the soft light bathing her in quiet, gentle grace. When he looked down, she smiled a small, knowing smile that said everything words could not. They had both walked through the storm and emerged unscathed. Later that night, they left the venue together. The city was aglow. The air was warm with the scent of spring, caramel coffee, and rain-washed wood from the nearby cafes. Under the street lamps along the Hudson River, they walked side by side, unhurried. The rippling water mirrored the city lights like a quilt of gold. Neither spoke at first. They didn't need to. Silence had become the gentlest language between them. Emily was the first to break it. "Do you ever regret hiring me?" she asked, her voice soft, carrying a smile underneath. Ethan paused, looking up at the bridge lights stretching across the sky like threads of memory. "No," he said slowly. "Every day I don't regret it is another day I know I made the best decision of my life." She laughed quietly. "That's a very diplomatic answer, Mr. Cole." "Not diplomatic," he said, smiling. "Just honest." The breeze from the river brushed past them. A few strands of her hair lifted, and he reached up gently to tuck them behind her ear. "I remember the first time I saw you," he said softly. "You were standing in the rain, holding that little box. Do you remember what I said?" "You said I'd catch a cold if I kept standing there," she replied, smiling. "Right," he murmured, eyes distant with memory. "But what I was really thinking was, if you walked away, I might never see that light again." She looked at him, surprised at the tenderness in his tone. A year ago, this man had hidden behind walls of logic and control. Now he could speak of fear with peace in his voice. "Light never disappears, Ethan," she said gently. "It just waits for you to be brave enough to look for it again." He smiled a soft, unguarded smile that melted the night around them. "You always sound like someone made of both logic and light." "Maybe," she said, "because I've lived too long in the dark." They stopped at the river's edge. The city stretched before them, glowing like a man-made galaxy, its reflection trembling on the calm surface below. Ethan rested his hands on the railing. "I used to think strength meant never breaking," he said quietly. "But now I know strength is letting yourself open again." Emily nodded. She understood because she had learned the same lesson through her own scars. After a moment, she whispered, "And sometimes, to rebuild something, you have to let it fall apart first." He turned toward her, a faint smile in his eyes. Between them, the unspoken became clear. No confessions, no promises, only understanding. Love was already there, resting quietly in their gaze. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. His palm was warm, steady, and grounding. In the midst of the glittering city, this moment was the only truth that mattered. The night wind drifted softly across the river, rippling the lights into golden waves. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. Ethan's voice, low and gentle, brushed the air. "I used to think light came from success. Now I know it comes from the people we choose to walk with." She smiled, fingers tightening slightly around his. "And sometimes," she murmured, "that light comes from those who believe in us, even when we can't believe in ourselves." They stood there in silence. No rain, no thunder, just the tender reflection of the city above and its mirror below. All wounds had softened into quiet memory. A breeze rippled across the river, scattering light into 1,000 glittering fragments. Each spark shimmered like proof that light could be rebuilt slowly, patiently, from hearts that had learned to forgive. Ethan squeezed her hand, whispering, "We built this not just Phoenix, but a life worth living again." Emily nodded, eyes following the glow on the water. "Yes," she said softly, "the light we built." That night the sky was cloudless, and in that moment they both understood some losses aren't endings at all. They are beginnings in disguise. Sometimes losing everything isn't the end. It's the beginning of who you were meant to be.